Hi and welcome. Thank you so much to everyone who's joining us. We can't see you, but we know you're there, and we're very happy to be a part of your part of the festival. I'm Maisie Lawrence. I'm delighted to be hosting tonight's event, celebrating Malika's Poetry Kitchen and the anthology that we published last year called Too Young, Too Loud, Too Different. Thank you so much to Paisley Book Festival for inviting us to be a part of their wonderful hybrid festival. They are now in their third year, and do check out their other events on their YouTube channel. And of course, if you like what you see of us tonight, do please buy our book and also the collections of the poets who are joining us tonight. So I'm delighted, I'll introduce them more fully, but I'm delighted to introduce Dorothea Smart and Sam Larose, who are two esteemed, acclaimed poets who are in the book and both have been members of Kitchen. What we're going to do this evening is talk a little bit about Kitchen because it's quite an extraordinary organisation, and then we'll hear from both of the poets and very briefly from me. But I was really struck by the idea of the stories that make us, which is the theme of this year's Paisley Festival, and I think that's a theme that fits very, very well with Malika's Kitchen. So I'll just talk very briefly about Kitchen and then open it up for Jacob and Dorothea. So Malika's Poetry Kitchen is a poetry collective which was founded in 2001 by Malika Booker and Roger Robinson, who have gone on to be undoubtedly two of the most important British poets of their generation. So this year we published our 20th anniversary anthology, so we've just come of age, Too Young, Too Loud, Too Different, and I was honoured to be one of the editors with Rishi Dastadar. So the two people joining me, Dorothea Smart is a Kitchen alum, and poet and educator Jacob Sam Larose is often spoken about as the third Beatle of Kitchen, because he was there right from the start. And I'm just going to speak briefly about the two. There are two introductory pieces in the anthology, one which tells the history. And just before we came online, we were talking about how important it is to have the history of activism that's led by marginalised communities put into the centre and written down clearly. And that's what's been done so beautifully in the book. I'm just going to start us off this evening by talking about what Malika says as the kind of how Kitchen got started. She says, I have a fuzzy recollection of us over that meal discussing how writing communities like the Harlem Renaissance, the Negritude movement and the Caribbean artist movement had created some of the best writers of our time. I quoted an African proverb, a family that eats together stays together, and began to dream of the space where Black writers could gather, eat and develop their craft. Then Roger said, what are we waiting for? Let's just do it. That's very Roger. Here, we said, in this house, Friday, next week, we'll call it Malika's Poetry Kitchen. So that's how we got started. So my first question for Jacob and Dorothea is, how did you both join Kitchen?
Dorothea, do you want to jump in or do you want me to?
Well, I can say that Kitchen had been going for a few years. And I asked somebody. I know that the first night that I went, it was being led by Jacob, and Kitchen at that point was meeting kind of like upstairs in the Royal Festival Hall. And I don't remember what night of the week it was and what have you. And my involvement kind of started there. So I think, would that have been about like 2005 or 6 or something like that? Maybe, I don't know. I was just maybe like a lot of people. I think I was just looking for support and looking for community and looking for a safe space, which is what Kitchen has kind of become for me over the years. And I mean, unlike some other people, it's kind of something that I've dipped in and out of over the decades, but it's always felt like, I don't know, maybe it's a bit like going to your mum's house. You can always go around to your mum's and get a meal. You know what I mean? You can turn up with your laundry, kind of thing, you know.
No matter how long you've been away, right?
Yeah, no matter how long
Yeah.
you've been away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of kitchen's kind of is kind of like that for me, you know, just kind of safe space, and just met and kind of connected more fully with people that I've known around and about, you know, and met new people as well, and just been introduced to kind of having my work kind of like really really stretched, you know, and really appreciated, um, and it's pushed me as well and introduced me to new work, new writers. Because one of the things that I always kind of like about Kitchen is that I know that I'm gonna kind of get to read or hear about like new poets or some name that I might know, but I might not know the person's work. Because that's something that kind of has been, I think, quite consistent with Kitchen over the years that I've dipped in and out, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Dorothea. And Jacob, how was it for you? And you led Dorothea's first session.
Yeah, you know, part of the joy of the whole experience, and this is the point where I get to do of bringing too young, too loud, to different together, you know, the whole experience of this coming into being, part of the joy of it is being reminded about things that, you know, I had completely forgotten. You know, there are many years that have passed since the very first kitchen session, right? And yeah, the joy of being reminded that, or I'm not, did I even know that the first session that Dorothy attended was a session that I ran? I'm not even sure if I 100% knew that. Um, but yeah, you know, I have no memory of even my own first session at Kitchen. I have memory of a vague conversation that I was having with Malika at one point, literally in her kitchen. And I think that conversation was kind of an echo of some of the thinking that had already been passed back and forth between Roger and Malika herself in terms of what a space like Malika's kitchen could possibly be, what value it could have. Um, at that time, Malika was, I think it was education coordinator at Apples and Snakes, and Roger was events programmer at Apples and Snakes. And you know, I was infused by and in awe of the work that they were doing in terms of bringing a range of different poets to stages and into work. Um, and through the work that they were doing, there was this wonderful international community of thinkers and minds that were being brought together. So again, I know this is referenced in the beginning of the anthology, but literally the conversations that would happen out front of Malika's house till all hours of the clock in the morning about poetry and about craft and about things that fed our poetry and the kind of crossover that happened between different people's work, whether they were from London, whether they were from the US, whether, you know, wherever it was that they were from, however it was that they arrived in that space, outside Malika's house or within her kitchen or wherever it may have been. You know, just the sparks that were flying in terms of the way that these different minds were being brought together. That was an incredibly exciting thing to be a part of. And you know, I'm really happy. I'm filled with joy to know that all these years later, Malika's Kitchen still continues to be an incredible force in the lives of so many poets and writers who are and have been involved with it.
I'm going to go off script because I sent you both some questions that I was going to ask, but you've both said some really interesting things. Roger, I believe, said that he thinks the impact of Black poets on British poetry has been to bring empathy. And I guess I would ask, like, if there's something that you think, you know, how you think Kitchen has changed poetry in the last 20 years? Like, what do you think it's changed? And, yeah, that wasn't a very well-worded question because it wasn't planned, sorry.
That's a beautiful question. It's quite a weighty question as well. Yeah, it's interesting. There are a few different things that come to mind. I'll kind of jump on one, which might not be answering your question directly, but one of the things I will always remember is this. So Malika and Roger, again, as you said, and I didn't even know this, being referred to as the third Beatle in this whole thing. Malika and Roger, there's this kind of really interesting relationship because they're actually a generation maybe just before me. They were doing their thing before I was present, right? And yet, as I came up, I kind of stood somewhere closely alongside them in some way, shape, or form. So there was a period of time, and there continues to be this kind of experience of being in awe of the work that they were doing and seeing them taking spaces, seeing them being positioned in certain ways, and then seeing the kinds of conversations they were having amongst each other and with themselves about how their work was being profiled, how it wasn't being profiled in the way that it perhaps could be, and what it is that they could do with that. And one of the things I take away from what it is that Malika's Kitchen has done and the work that Malika and Roger and so many poets of that generation have modeled is this sense of we need to open these doors, or we needed to open these doors for ourselves. There were voices that were not being recognized, or that were being recognized in very, how should we say, tokenistic or exoticized ways, right? We don't need another black poet. We've got one of those already. Forget the rest of them. We got someone who feels that close. It's fine. We don't need another poet of this particular background or characteristic or whatnot because we've ticked that box already. No, there was a wonderful way in which Malika, Roger, and again a number of other poets are kind of around that time, but I'm thinking particularly of them because of the work that's happened with Kitchen. There was a wonderful way in which they said, okay, look, if these other spaces are not recognizing the value of our voices, are not recognizing the work that we are doing and the craft and the quality of the work that we are doing, then we will build our own audiences, we will create our own structures, we will constitute our own communities, and we will put weight behind what it is that we're doing until and this wasn't to court anyone else's favor. This was for our own development, right? But in doing that, there was a way in which other audiences kind of stood up and said, "Hey, there is something exciting happening over there that needs to be paid attention to." So I love what it is that Kitchen has done in that sense, as well as all of the others that I'm sure we're going to go on to speak about.
Dorothea, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I mean, I guess it's if Jacob is saying, like that Malika and Roger were that generation, kind of like just a little bit before him, then I was kind of just like a little bit before Roger and Malika came along, and I, well, for me, from my point of view, is of being there before and feeling very alone in things. I think one of the critical things that they've brought to poetry is a sense of community, really and truly, and that we can be there for each other, and we can, and Kitchen's very much about like taking each other along to, if it's about opening doors, you don't just go through the door by yourself, you're taking people with you through the door, and I think maybe not to say that that Black poets in prior to that weren't connected, but it kind of Kitchen kind of formalized it more, I suppose, you know, and made it like a weekly, you know, thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I was part of a group of poets who did the Afro Style School workshops that Spread the Word put on. And for me, that was such a kind of landmark experience, you know. And if you look at the in the introduction to the book, when it's spoken about as being Roger and Malika deciding that, you know, that didn't need to just be a one-off, that energy needed to kind of continue, you know. Yeah, so
Yeah.
community. Yeah.
Mm.
And
I
yeah.
I gotta jump in. I gotta jump
Please,
in
Jacob, go for
and
it.
just to give a little hail out to that kind of shall we say cross-generational kind of thing. Um, so actually leading sessions that Dorothea was a member of was a real trip for me because again I had a lot of respect and admiration and still do, I hasten to add, for Dorothea. And I remember, Dorothea, I don't know if you remember this, there was an anthology that you were editing. I can't remember which anthology it was, but it was, I think it was one of the first anthologies that I was actually submitting work for. And this was like years before, right? And being a typical young poet at that time, I'd left it to the very last minute to submit my work. And there was an address for the submissions to send the works to. And it was like due that very same day. And I was like, okay, yeah, look, if I put it in the post, it's probably not going to be there. So let me just hand deliver this work. And I remember rocking up at this address and knocking on the door to hand this poem in, you know, all of my young poet self. And Dorothea answered the door, and I don't, you know, she probably wasn't expecting anyone to actually hand deliver poems. And it was only as I came away from that moment that I was like, hold on, wait, was that really something that I should have done? Probably not. Um, but yeah. And just, you know, just that sense of you being established in my mind as this editor, this person who was doing the work, who was a part of the world that I wanted to enter into. And then years later to be kind of holding a space that you were able to partake in. And there was no, this is the thing, there was no kind of generational awkwardness or anything about it. We just communed, if that makes sense. It was just like there was no kind of oh, this is a bit weird because you know you're an editor and you've been doing this work before. It was just like, hey, welcome.
Yeah.
Let's hold space together.
I think because I think what was shared was this kind of like hunger for
Yes.
community, you know, and for a kind of as well also a kind of serious sort of like critical kind of an appreciation and a critical kind of like feedback and you know, for our work, you know, and just to and an appreciation of like the various kind of diasporas and communities of poetry that we were coming out of, you know, and being able to kind of appreciate our work out coming from kind of various kind of traditions, whether that was from the Caribbean or or African American or African poetry, you know, and having it kind of held with respect and regard, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Indian
this
voices, New Zealand voices, a range of different voices from around the world found a home in the space that it was that Kitchen constituted, for sure.
Jacob, I feel like you've done a far more beautiful introduction for Dorothea than I'm going to manage. But on that wonderful note, I just want to mention one more thing that Malika said. She writes in the book about a saying that was on Guyanese billboards when she was growing up: "Together we aspire, together we achieve." I think, we've got 3 generations of poets in the room tonight, and I'm really excited to introduce the wonderful Dorothea Smart so that we can hear some poems. So Dorothea Smart is an activist, a poet, and a live artist. She's contributed internationally to Black feminist activism, and she's worked at London's Black, Lesbian, and Gay Centre project. Her collection Ship Shape is an A-level set text. This is something that her and Jacob have in common. And her commissioned poems will appear on the ventilation columns of the forthcoming Thames Tideway Tunnel. Can't wait to see those. And she's working on a PhD at UWI Barbados. I always want to talk about friendships and connection with Kitchen. So I first met Dorothea when she graced us with her presence in London at a few Kitchen sessions a couple of years ago. She's an extraordinary listener. If you're reading out a poem and you say something slightly different, she'll tick you up on it. It's incredible. And a brilliant poet. I felt lucky to share a space with her, and I just found an email that I sent her in 2019 calling one of her poems a compact little bomb of brilliance. So I'm very excited to hear what she will read for us tonight. Dorothea, the floor is yours for your set.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Right. Well, a few years back, I kind of started a bit of a little tradition of mine of like always starting my sets with like another poet's work. And because so many of my favorite poets are in this wonderful book, I wanted to begin with another Kitchen poet, Patricia Foster Mckinley. And I think Patricia is somebody who I initially met through Kitchen, and have relationships in other ways, poetry relationships within other ways. But so anyway, let me plow on. And it's my brother's best friend, one of my favorites of hers. My brother Andrew isn't going to school today. Philip has gone. The night before, my brother and some friends sat on wooden chairs around Philip's bed, a lone island in the middle of the living room, and talked about playing cricket, sniffing or rubbing eyes with sleeves, trying to sound upbeat. One person's laughter missing. I sat on a small beige leather puff near the telly, which was nonsense in the background, and my mum got up, rushing out. It was the first time I had seen her cry in front of my brother and me. Philip's bald head was the only light thing in a dimly lit room. His eyelids were heavy, eyes rolling around underneath them. I saw my brother's eyes dart everywhere around the room, stopping finally at Philip's feet, shrunken and small, under a purple and blue crocheted bed cover. My brother's best friend looked 11, like me, instead of 17, his muscles folded and tucked away, prepared for a long rest. This I know, this is my poem that's in the collection. Is called Elephantine. And it's set on the Panama Canal, one of my obsessions. Roosevelt sits in the cabin of the Elephantine digger, imported piece by piece for the big ditch. Piece by piece, black men with dreams arrive, dark hats mouldy in the damp of constant wet. A lot of the fellas had water to wash that day. Musty felt hat better than no hat at all. Roosevelt, white suited, addressed workers and engineers. Keep the dirt flying, boys. Hats hurtle in the air. The press took pictures of shining machines and white-suited men. When I did start that first time I was going to kitchen, I think I was working towards what would have been my second collection, I think, Shipshape. And so I'm going to read a few poems from those, and from Shipshape. And these are some of the ones that I think I worked on or matured through the kind of but serious feedback that Malika's Kitchen can give you. This is Heart and Feet, which is dedicated to a really wonderful friend of mine who passed away 15 years ago now. So, and was a mentor of sorts, as well as being a really wonderful friend. Heart and Feet. My toes curl. I watch for her breath, smell death. On the ward bed, heart red, stain at her mouth. She is still. I see her toenails, red like mine. I did them last night. Let me go out with style, she said. The screen's a flat red line. A lone tone the nurse turns off. My heart, it slips out my feet, stains a smudge on the clean floor. Can I ask the nurse to fix this? You gave me my heart to love with, my feet to move through the world. A ring of coins around your toes, a toll for the gate, soft red earth and leaves at her heels. My friend Myrna Bain actually passed away the same year that my mother passed away. When I wrote these poems, I think I was kind of preempting that loss in many ways, or just the loss of that generation, say. This poem's called Litany of Survivals 1. There's so much left. The bedsit, full of barrels, bags, and boxes packed to go, like a barn house, Mum says. We arrive early morning, edge our way round piles. Mum and I stare at all Cousin Iris things. We begin to sort and share out decades of shopping that never made it back home. Packs of panties, bulk rolls of J-cloths, boxes of soap powder, bottles of cleaning fluids, packets of tea, bags of rice, cups and saucers, plates and bedclothes, buttons, zips and balls of edging lace, fabric by the yard, multiples of the same dress, shoes, watches, t-shirts, all piled up, ready to go, waiting for shipping or to be carried by the next body going home. Her West London funeral was a family affair. A sparse sermon noted her years of generosity. Cards were read from overseas. A good friend, together with Mum, would see a headstone was placed. Her brother, cinnamon eyes darkened with shadows, sweet boy years behind him, locked in a marriage to a Jehovah Witness wife and child. A road refused for a good glass of rum with you fellas, curdled at the warehouse store. pleading, pass them on to somebody that could use them now. Mum promised to make sure what was needed finally made its way to Barbados cousins whose faded blue sky envelopes, folded, preserved, dated through the decades, left with me for the last bus home. Litany of survivals, too. There's so much left. The wardrobe full of times past and times to come without you. Under your bed is packed with suitcases you'd asked me to clear. Older brown grips of your arrival, replaced now with 70s beige vinyl cases, navy blue 80s, crowded with goodbyes kept for yet to be days. Knitted nylon blankets you gave to us Macamirs at Christmas, not quite his and hers, but still matching. English rose tea sets set aside for guests, hand-me-downs laid to rest by bargain clothes, the sewing machine lost among reels of ready-to-wear, armchair back covers in a world of sofas, irreverent to Sunday best. Your passport, royal blue, corners cut, stamped, redundant, packed behind bursting white Louvre doors that murmur hopes for a useful future. Mum arrived, packed the wardrobes to leave them full. I think I have time for one more.
You absolutely do. I'd be sad if you didn't.
I know one that I know this one I bought to Kitchen, and it's a poem. It's called A Poem Beginning with a Line from Claudia Rankin, and it's after Lisa Journo's poem Beginning with a Line by Frank Lima. Your historical selves, her white self and your black self, are in high relief, inescapable, except maybe in those private times. You're both laughing at the tumbled laundry, the moody rain, your black self skidding in the mud, same way as her white self, drenched from the sweaty humidity, broken by a shower. You are both grabbing at clothes on the line with giggles and soft slaps from flapping sheets. Her children attempt to rescue a few. Her white self, ankle deep as your black self, hands reaching out to steady you and the bundle as thunder rumbles, reminders of history unheeded in this moment, your black hands holding her white hands tight. Her white self breathing hard as your black self makes it to the back porch, collapsing in embrace, children piling on top of wet kissed lips. In that private minute, there's a shared moment. Above their small heads, up on your feet now, clothes discarded, laundry abandoned to the squeals of your boy and girl, purveyors of innocence lost, when her white self offers and your black self accepts. Inside the spring months, the constant rain and futile laundry days that have made you cry, wipe tears of frustration from your black self, held in the arms of her white self, saying, "Don't worry, we'll wash it all again together." And you say, "Yes, thank you, ma'am." And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Yes, let's give thanks to Dorothea Smart there.
Thank you, Jake.
I've said at different points through this evening how much I've admired Dorothea over the years, and yeah, it's an absolute joy to reconnect and to be present for a reading of your work, Dorothea. Thank you. You've blessed us. You have blessed us. Yeah, so it falls upon me. It is now my responsibility to introduce the next person that you, or the people at home, that you are going to hear poetry from. You have already seen her this evening. I'm going to introduce Maisie Lawrence. Maisie is a British American poet and editor. She spent 3 years managing the UK's premier poetry award, and I'm speaking of the Forward Prizes there. During her time there, and I think it's really important to underline this, during her time there, she worked to notice how I've slowed down to emphasize every single word. During her time there, she worked to permanently diversify the judging panels and make the awards open and inclusive to traditionally marginalized voices. We should stop there and just give her a round of applause and like celebrations and due. But we can also say that her work has been published in magazines, including the Rialto, Ambit. She's been shortlisted for the Strokestown Poetry Competition. She's recently received, and this is another round of applause and celebration because she's recently received some Arts Council funding for a collection of work. She's the editorial director of Dialogue Books. I could continue singing her praises, but we want to hear the poetry. Maisie Lawrence, it is your time. Step forth.
Oh, Jacob, thank you. I feel very embarrassed and blushing. And I also just want to say thank you to Jacob and Dorothea. I feel like the kind of young imposter tonight, and it's just beautiful to share the space with two people who I admire immensely, and to listen to Dorothea read. She has such a calming effect on me. I feel really centered in a really beautiful place hearing her words. Jacob, thank you again. I'm just going to read two poems, one of which is in the anthology, and I will start with that one. This is a poem called Marianne. I had been to, my day job is as an editor, and I'd been to this horrible thing called the London Book Fair, where agents and editors kind of speed date until the walls start to perspirate. And the last meeting I'd had was this wonderful meeting with an agent, and we'd started talking about the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier and that first line. And you'll see why this poem came from there. Last night I awoke in the forest, and again it was on fire, blue flames on the ends of branches. I went to a flame and asked to borrow the tree. Dancing with me tired out the little tree. The blue flame was a tiny ball. You made me blue, old shoe. So we slept together and the flame grew small, with nothing left to feed on. A bluebell as my eyes were closing. When I awoke, the flames were huge. The forest was just blue. Blue as a shoe. Yes, you. My tree was gone, the flames dancing. I went to the blue flames to start again. But they swayed together in a rhythm I couldn't catch and blew salt ash into my eyes. And that is a poem that was in my mind at the Brick Fair and that I came to Kitchen on a Friday night and wrote down basically in one go. And I just want to read one more. This is a slightly longer piece that I've been working on about my family. Jacob kindly mentioned that I'm half American, and I have this very strange relationship with St. Louis, where my grandparents were from. And this is a poem that I've been kind of stitching together since my grandparents are now both gone, about my kind of memories of that time. And I had some very helpful feedback about it from the kitchen session, and that helped me to finish it. So this is a poem called Rainbow Loops. I take a bite of an Oreo and open a door to St. Louis in 1996. Outside, the sky is blueberry bright and the crickets are singing. In the kitchen, a juice box version of me is eating Fruit Loops with milk and blueberries, one O at a time, leaving all the best till last, and sit asking, when? Until Grandma says I've digested. So I run out to do battle with the water monster, the white and blue Polaris pool cleaner with its 3 wheels and big vacuum bag, who is less celestial bright star in this story, more toe-nibbling seabed hoover, who tries to pull me down to the depths of the rough white bottom, so I shoot up gasping for air, cling to the sun-baked side, an angry cat that spits when flicked with water where an apple concentrate version of me is sitting, while Mum talks to her friend Irene and I just tip into the black water, a little somersaulting acrobat on my Olympic debut, the light fading as I go down and down until Dad dives in and fishes me out. With brown hair, an open mouth that will talk non-stop for the next 10 years until a man stamps my passport and says, "Welcome home, son," hands me a lollipop, flicks the propeller on my FAO Schwartz baseball cap. My grandparents are now just a glass wall away, and I race over on my new scooter, half happy to see them, half wanting to show off. And Grandpa wheels my monster suitcase to the parking lot where the humidity hugs my chest to say hello, and they want to know, how was the flight? But I need Grandma to make her only recipe, fried post toasties. Scrambled eggs with cornflakes thrown in at the last second, which is the perfect thing if you threw up 3 times on the 45-minute flight from Chicago, twice in the rental car centre and once on the drive. But now none of that matters because we are here, in the wooden house that expands on rainy days. So the gate to the basement gets stuck and Grandpa has to open it, and he says he's really getting old, too old for a home on 2 floors, but for me it's a dragon's cave, where I find the piano that plays like an organ, the beautiful violin with the broken bridge, a steam train with actual steam, and I could just stay here. And one night, when Grandpa and Grandma are in bed, I do, because my 2 older cousins, who I call brother, start shouting and their mouths get bigger and their voices kick me downstairs, so I hide down here in the dark. Try to be small as the original Mickey Mouse on a shelf, who has 2 stick-thin wooden legs and soft black paper ears, until the next day Mum tells them to knock it off. At the same yellow kitchen table, where a long-haired version of me snaps at Grandma, and we barely speak until I work out how I got my stubborn streak. And she gives me her white glove collection, our tiny hands mirror-aged replicas, and I wear them as we look through the photographs of her life, and she tells me the names of the towns where we come from in Ukraine and Poland. And there is one last photo I have somewhere but I never open, which leads to Mum handing me a little box. She saw you as her future. Inside is Grandma's wedding ring, which slips on like it was made for me, and her kitchen table is now in a museum. The black and white sofa set has moved to California, and when Dad walks up the tarmac drive past the white mailbox with the red flag to see the old wooden house, the new owner shouts, "Get out, this isn't your home anymore." Thank you very much. It's now my distinct honour to introduce Jacob Sam Larose. Jacob is a poet, educator, editor, and creative technologist. He is one of the poets who I feel like most understands technology and is going to be the person who takes us into the future. I mean that. We should pause there. He also has the best relationship with email of any poet I know. I respect him immensely. He's incredibly famous in the poetry world for being the artistic director of Barbican Young Poets programme. And I was saying to my mum this evening that there isn't a young poet writing today who doesn't credit Jacob as a mentor. I just want to take a minute to say how important that is. And he served as poet in residence for English Heritage. He's also been a poetry professor at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. His collection, Breaking Silence, is an A-level set text, as I mentioned. He and Dorothea have that in common. And it was shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best First Collection in 2012. So as we briefly mentioned, I used to run that award, and I think it was a couple of years later that Jacob and I met when he joined the board. He was a real revolution and a revelation, and anyone should be lucky to have that in their lives. Many years later, we performed at the Second Home Poetry Festival in London, and after I read, he said to me something like, "I didn't realise you had poems like that in you," which kept me going for about the next 5 years. He is an inspiration and an immense encouragement to everyone, and every time I read his poem in the anthology, it gives me shivers. So it's my great honour to introduce him tonight and to listen to him read. Jacob.
Oh, too kind. You know when someone introduces you and you're just like, wow, who is that person that they're speaking of? Oh, wow, you are too kind. And Maisie, I was not just saying that. When I heard you read at Second Home, and every time I've heard you read, it's a joy. What joy there is in the work we do and the work we share. Right, so I guess I should read some poems. So we're doing the thing where we read a poem from the anthology. My poem from the anthology is this poem that I'm about to start with. Um, it starts from a kind of morbid perspective, but it's not a morbid poem. I don't think it's a morbid poem, and this is my personal interpretation. Your interpretation may differ. Um, the poem is written as an ode, really. Just in front of London Bridge, there were, I'm not sure if there still are, haven't been that way for a little while now, but there were a set of boys. There was a set of boys, and these boys used to ride up and down the road on their bikes, popping wheelies. So this poem has a rather imaginative title. It is indeed titled For the Young Men Popping Wheelies on Southwark Street in Late Afternoon Traffic. One day you will die, but not today. And perhaps you have already tasted it, whatever endings taste of, a mouthful of road and iron, the weight of something implacable you couldn't lift yourself from under. Not today. Today you are brazen, quick as a blade, wheeled up and threading into an HGV's path and out again, uproarious, alive, and testing whatever binds the rest of us to good sense. Whatever weights another driver's fist with righteousness and ties us to our quaint and tidy appetites and has us hook our eyes to pull you down and safe and anchored to the meek and common ground. Today, everything lifts from you, like the ringing of a bell in clean air, like smoke. So there was some reference made to my relationship with technology. I was one of those strange kids who was like a double geek. I was a literature geek, but I was also a technology geek. I had it both ways, um, and still do to a certain extent. Um, but I was also a bit of a gamer in my youth. And when I say gamer, I'm not talking about, these newfangled computer gaming consoles and all that business. No, I'm talking about the original arcade machines from back in the day. So being a poet, I turned my poetic lens to that kind of aspect of gaming history. And this is a poem called Credit Due. It begins with a little extract from Uncyclopedia about the high score kind of sheet. And the high score sheet of every game, if you do not have the familiarity with any kind of these old school gaming arcade machines, you typically have like a high score screen, and maybe one of your goals was to kind of get up on that high score screen. But when they were first kind of put in place, when no one had touched them, you'd have just these kind of initial capital letters. So the first row for the high score sheet would be AAA. The quote goes, AAA is, was, and always will be, without question, the greatest video game player on earth. This is the poem, Credit Due. Those days, my list of cornerstone truths began with drum and bass, and the fact that there would always be a chip shop open in a lonely street, its light and signage testament against closing hour and the falling dark. And in that chip shop, coin op cabinet, waypoint for the lost, aimless, and hungry, squat in corner Buddha of the appetite and emptiness. Bless the lottery of dumb and broken stick, or careworn buttons mashed to senselessness. Bless shotgun hot seat winner plays first round. Bless leaderboard and high score sheet. Whoever cared enough to mark the time with their initials. Bless the hallowed AAA and all the screens we poured ourselves into. Bless those nights, our small change lives. Hmm. So it's been a while since I was last on a plane. The last time I was on a plane gave rise to the experience that is recounted in this next poem that I'm about to read. Um, this poem is entitled "The Truth and Nothing But." The wound of a man's scream from the back of the plane as we board is a red flag. He's being deported, says the flight attendant when asked, and he doesn't want to go. The woman sitting next to me thinks it's undignified. He doesn't have to carry on like that, and she has rights too. She paid for this flight and should be able to travel in comfort, and now she's afraid. And what if there were children? And now we have to worry if he'll bring the plane down, which feels like an inappropriate fear to voice on a plane, like naming Macbeth in a theatre. And it's not just fear, it's everything she believes she has a right to, how that weighs against the intrusion or inconvenience of someone else's unknown story. A flight attendant says, "We don't know what he's done, or where he's going, or why he doesn't want to go back." His scream is constant as other passengers board, take seats, look over their shoulders, and I don't have his language, and I don't understand what he's saying, and I will never know his name or the simple fact of his face. And finally, he is silent, and we rise into the air, and there is no solid ground beneath us. So one of the threads in that last poem is the notion of migration, forced migration in that sense. Um, my family hails from Guyana. Um, my mother came to this country in the 60s. I was born here, so I have this constant experience in my family as well, particularly in conversation with my mother, as being referred to as the British kid. Um, so I have this really interesting relationship with the notion of home and what home is and what home stands for or represents. And I have that kind of post-colonial experience of kind of spreading the notion of home between two different spaces. That notion of having a foot in two different boats. One boat going back to the country that my family hails from, one boat landing here and docked here. So this next poem is titled Heartland, What a Mother May Have Said. It's kind of written in the imagined voice of my mother. And yeah, it kind of puts words to some of that experience. Heartland, What a Mother May Have Said. This country has no interior for us. We remain on its shores. Our hearts rest in another distant place. This is the source of our strength, our tragedy. You, son, do not yet know your own heart, except where we've delivered slivers of its muscular music on our tongues. I fear for you. I wonder how you will survive. There is a silence where your heart should be, a space you will try to make other belongings fit. Your blood is born of a land of many rivers. It is a heritage you cannot claim. You do not know the taste of Baggotsville, of All Boys Town, the Kaieteur, Tipperary, the Demerara's West Bank. Which land mothered you? When they tell you to go home, in which direction will you turn? I'm going to try and squeeze in two more poems before I wear out my welcome here this evening.
Please do, Jacob.
Oh,
Definitely.
you're too kind, Maisie. Too kind, too kind. So the first of those poems is a very, very raw and fresh poem called, it's currently titled Tendered Disarray. I'm of an age where, you know, uh, mortality is very present in my experience, in close mortality in terms of people I know, friends, family members, so on and so forth. But also, I'm of an age where I have a certain amount of responsibility for my elders, and kind of real practical responsibility. So I guess this one goes out to the carers in the audience, the people who are responsible for other people. And yeah, it's titled Tendered Disarray. At least once in your life, you should care for a body that is not your own, its heft, its insolence. Pay attention to exactly how it falls. I know how to dress a body, to fit a girdle, hide the twin scars on each hip, the gravity of it all, decaying orbit, how it pulls you in, the reef of its own flotsam and tendered disarray. No morbidity this, more ode for the dust we constantly return to. This body used to dance. This body could once hold its own weight. This body once wore heels. This body short of breath. This body blueprint for a body. This body wed to everything it's been and done and all its old instructions. This body's sovereign law. This body no longer curtained, precious, private. This body and the gaudy constellations of its fears. This body's punchline. And so this body knows. Right. As I said, I'll try and squeeze in one more poem just to round us off. This is a poem called Synesthesia. And it's, one of those self-indulgent poems about poetry. So yeah, Synesthesia. In Oregon, there's a blind man who sees with his tongue. A part of his skull was surprised by a bullet that wasn't meant for him. His wife screamed for him in Portuguese before she remembered which country that particular night belonged to. Under duress, the tongue sometimes returns to the heart's motherland. The blind man has learned to taste light. Myopia is an aberration of the eyeball's curvature to the extent that the light falls short, like trying to discern the words of a neighbor's conversation through the walls. The words slot into place like lenses in an optician's testing frame. Some nights, a poem arrives like an unexpected bullet to the brain, and everything tastes different after. Thank you so much.
Jacob, that was fantastic. Thank you. I think you've had a real effect on me and Dorothea from the way we're both
wow.
looking.
Absolutely. Oh, wow.
I'm going to bring us to a close here. I wish we could just sort of sit in this space and marvel. I just want to say thank you both of you, to our wonderful poets, for joining us this evening and for honouring me to be able to share the space with you. We've talked about generations and collective and family that eats together, stays together, and I really feel like we've just been in a wonderful space of a true collective tonight. I was thinking as you were finishing reading, Jacob, that when I listen to both of you, you both make me marvel at the world. Dorothea in the amazing details that she captures, and Jacob, I always think of, when I listen to your work, I always want to stare at the sky and just wonder that we get to be here. If you've liked what you've seen this evening, please do buy our book. It's rather good. Evening Standard picked it as a non-fiction book of the year, and we're jolly proud of it. It's living hard publishing a book in the pandemic. And thank you so much to our audience who we can't see, but we love nonetheless, and will join on social media afterwards. Jacob,
Can I just jump in very quickly, very quickly? I just really wanted to say, I want to celebrate this event. I want to celebrate the space that we've been able to share with each other, but I also particularly want to celebrate you, Maisie, for all the work that you've done, you and Rishi, and Jill Abrams as well. One of the beautiful things about Kitchen, as we've spoken about, is the varying different generations of people who come together, and the way that, yes, we confer praises upon Roger and Malika for having the first thoughts, for bringing this all together. But, you know, there were people who took up the torch and ran Kitchen for evenings. So, you know, big up people like Nick McCullough and B. You know, right on down to people like, again, Jill Abram, carrying the torch, and yourself, Maisie, and Rishi, for the work that you've done in pulling this together. You know, it's a community effort, and I think this anthology that Dorothea is holding up is a real manifestation of that community effort. So praises due, Maisie, praises due.
Thank you, Jacob. Maisie.
Well, thank you both. Dorothea, is there anything else you'd like to share? And Jacob, thank you for reminding me of my list of thank yous, which I'd clearly forgotten to write.
No, I just say to just go with everything that Jacob said, you know, and to everybody who's been in and out of Kitchen over the decades, you know, and yeah, it's amazing that that it's here, and the incredible the impact that it's had, and it's touched so many of us. So thanks to everybody who keeps Kitchen going and keeps it kind of working, and yeah.
Thank you, Dorothea. Well, this book celebrates our first 20 years, and I think after tonight, 20 more, please. And thank you again to Paisley for having us. It's been an absolute pleasure to share the space with you both tonight, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody out there. Thank you.